Being on stage and speaking in front of people can be scary, it can be exciting, but there is so much information for us so that we can learn how to do it. I Googled tips for good speaking, and most of what I found is common sense kind of stuff, like look nice, know your know your material, practice, practice, practice. And it also says to be yourself, but adjust for your audience. Get to know your audience. When I think about adjusting my style for the audience, I get a little nervous about that. But they say you've got to know your audience and it's important to connect with your audience. It actually reminds me about the story of the wide-mouthed frog. One time, this wide-mouthed frog had babies. She didn't know what to feed her babies, so she decided to go into the woods and ask her friends what they feed their babies to give her an idea. She comes up to Mrs. Bird and she says, "Mrs. Bird, what do you feed your babies?" And Mrs. Bird said, "Well, I feed my babies worms." And the wide-mouthed frog said, "Thank you." So the wide-mouthed frog goes a little bit further into the woods and she comes across Mrs. Squirrel. The wide-mouthed frog says, "Mrs. Squirrel, what do you feed your babies?" And Mrs. Squirrel said, "Well, I feed my babies nuts." The wide-mouthed frog said, "Thank you." So she goes a little bit further in the woods, and the wide-mouthed frog comes across Mrs. Alligator. She says, "Mrs. Alligator, what do you feed your babies?" And Mrs. Alligator said, "I feed my babies wide-mouthed frogs." And the wide-mouthed frog said, "Ooh, you don't see many of them anymore, do you?" See, sometimes we do need to adjust our style and always know who our audience is.